Today, we're going to dig into the story behind a true gaming legend. It's a tale about a creator who spent an almost unheard of 4 years on a single game, battling creative roadblocks, tech that was barely up to the task, and the chilling realization that his masterpiece might actually be, well, boring. All right, let's get into it.
4 years. Just think about that for a second. That is how long it took one single developer to bring Prince of Persia into the world. You have to remember, this was the mid-1980s. Computer technology was changing in the blink of an eye. Spending 4 years on one game was basically an eternity. It was a huge, huge gamble.
And this is the guy who took that crazy gamble, Jordan Mechner. Fresh out of Yale, his real dream wasn't to be a game developer. Nope, he wanted to write movies. Making video games, that was just his day job. Something to pay the bills while he worked on his screenplays. But that little side gig was about to become his entire life.
Now you gotta understand, Mechner was already a pretty big deal. His first game, Karateka, was a massive hit. So of course, the publisher, a company called Broderbund, was desperate for a sequel. They wanted the safe bet, the guaranteed moneymaker. But Mechner, he had other plans.
He flat out did not want to make Karateka 2. Instead, he pitched this whole new idea, a risky adventure inspired by the big screen action of Indiana Jones and the classic stories from the Arabian Nights. He envisioned a game that felt like a blockbuster movie, full of daring escapes, deadly traps, and ancient secrets. The publisher? Let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. But the deal they eventually made would change gaming history.
And this is the absolute key to the whole story, the deal. Mechner told them, forget a salary, I'll work for a cut of the profits. For the publisher, this was a no-brainer, zero risk. For Mechner, though, it meant everything. It meant complete creative freedom, no boss, no deadlines. But it also meant that if the game flopped, he'd get absolutely nothing for all those years of work. That freedom is precisely why the project could stretch on for 4 long years.
Okay, so if you want your game to feel like a movie, the movement has to be perfect. It has to be fluid and realistic in a way no one had ever seen before. The big question was, how on earth do you pull that off on a primitive computer like the Apple II?
Well, he did it with some good old-fashioned ingenuity. He went out and bought a very expensive video camera, took it to a parking lot, and filmed his younger brother David running, jumping, and climbing all over the place. And then he promptly returned the camera within the 30-day window to get all his money back. Genius. And why his brother David? Well, he had the single most important qualification: he was willing to work for free.
Now, filming his brother was the easy part. What came next was just an insane amount of work. The technique is called rotoscoping, and Mechner basically had to invent his own low-budget version. Look at this process. He's playing the video on a VCR, pausing it, and literally taking a photograph of the TV screen. Then he'd trace the outline from the photo onto paper, and then digitize each and every drawing. Just this part of the project took almost an entire year.
But when he finally saw that little character running across his computer screen for the first time, he knew. He knew he had created something revolutionary. The character moved with a sense of weight and realism that was just unheard of at the time. This was the movie magic he was chasing.
So, with the animation looking incredible, Mechner spent the next 2 years just building the world. He created a level editor from scratch and designed dozens of amazing dungeons, full of spike traps and pressure plates and all sorts of puzzles. But as he started putting it all together, this horrifying realization began to set in.
It seems like a crazy question now, doesn't it? But for 3 long years, that was the reality. Prince of Persia was lonely. It was this beautiful, amazing world, but there was nobody else in it. It was just you against the architecture.
I mean, just imagine that feeling. You've spent years on this revolutionary animation. You've built 50 entire levels filled with clever traps. And you realize the game just isn't fun. It's a technical marvel, it's gorgeous to look at, but actually playing it was kind of empty, kind of boring.
And here's a hilarious little side note about how hard it is to guess what people will find fun. Around this same time, the entire office at Broderbund became hopelessly addicted to a new puzzle game from the Soviet Union called Tetris. I mean, nobody got any work done. And yet, the higher-ups actually passed on publishing it. Their reasoning? They thought it was too nerdy to ever be a hit. Ha!
So, back to our prince. Mechner knew he needed to do something drastic. He made the painful decision to throw out most of his levels, cutting the game down from 50 to just a dozen or so. And then he decided to add the one thing he had avoided for 3 years: combat.
But adding enemies meant creating a ton of new animations from scratch. So for the very first enemy, he came up with a brilliant shortcut. You run through a magic mirror and poof, an evil shadow version of you jumps out to fight you. Why was this so genius? Because he could reuse every single frame of animation he had already spent a year creating. It was the perfect solution.
But for the actual palace guards, he needed something new. He wanted the sword fights to feel just as real as the running and jumping. So where did he turn for inspiration? Of course, he went right back to Hollywood.
He found this incredible 6-second clip from the final sword fighting duel in the classic 1938 movie, The Adventures of Robin Hood. And he used his exact same painstaking rotoscoping technique on that film clip, translating the parries and thrusts of classic Hollywood swordplay directly into his game. It was the final, crucial piece of the puzzle.
And so, after 4 years of relentless, agonizing work, the game was finally done. The animation was groundbreaking. The combat was cinematic. It was a masterpiece. And when it was finally released, it completely and totally bombed. So what happened? Well, the problem was he had built the entire game for the Apple II computer. And by the time it came out in 1989, the Apple II was ancient history. It was a dying platform. No one was buying games for it. Mechner was absolutely crushed. He thought he had just wasted 4 years of his life.
But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. The game's path to success was just a slow burn. A year later, it got ported to PC. It still didn't sell great, but something interesting happened. It was pirated like crazy, which created this huge underground buzz. And then finally, in 91 and 92, it got ported to game consoles in Japan and Europe, and it just exploded. The game wasn't a flop. It was just a little ahead of its time.
In fact, Prince of Persia would eventually be ported to almost every single system you can imagine. It became one of the most widely adapted games of the entire decade. Second only to, you guessed it, Tetris. The very same nerdy game his publisher had passed on years before. You just can't make this stuff up.
What an amazing story of just sticking with it. When you think about it, the game's most iconic features, that awesome shadow enemy, the cinematic sword fights, they weren't even in the original plan. They were last-minute solutions to fix a really big problem. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many masterpieces are out there, not because of some perfect grand design, but because someone came up with a brilliant solution to a problem that was never supposed to be there in the first place?